The massive crystalline dome of the Galactic Council stretched endlessly above, its walls pulsing with soft blue light that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of 1,000 worlds. Commander Dae-ho Kim adjusted his black Terran Defense Force uniform and watched the chaos unfold below him from the observation deck. 12 different alien species filled the council floor, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, growls, musical tones, and electronic buzzes. The holographic star map at the center showed their worst nightmare, angry red dots spreading like a virus across the outer rim territories. Each dot represented a dead star system, consumed by something the galaxy had never seen before. Zibikai's Void Swarm had appeared 6 months ago from the dark space between galaxies. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They just ate everything: planets, moons, space stations, and any ship unlucky enough to get in their way. 17 star systems had already gone dark, their populations numbering in the billions, simply vanishing without a trace. Dae-ho gripped the railing tighter as he watched the Zeltharian High Speaker rise from his floating platform. The ancient alien looked like a walking tree made of living crystal, his 4 arms glowing with inner light. When he spoke, his words came through the universal translator in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "Honored delegates," the High Speaker began, "we face the greatest threat our galaxy has known in 10,000 years. The Void Swarm shows no mercy, accepts no surrender, and appears immune to conventional diplomacy." A ripple of fear passed through the assembled aliens. The spider-like arachnid delegate clicked her mandibles nervously. The gaseous nebula people flickered between different colors, showing their anxiety. Even the mighty Draconian Empire representatives, with their scaled skin and burning eyes, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. However, the High Speaker continued, his crystal arms spreading wide, "We possess the most advanced fleet in galactic history. Our combined forces number nearly 3,000 vessels, each equipped with technology refined over millennia of peaceful cooperation." Down on the main floor, Admiral Yoon Hana stood among the human delegation. She was a small woman compared to most of the aliens around her, but her presence commanded attention. Her graying hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her dark eyes missed nothing as she studied the tactical displays. The Kethmore delegate stepped forward, her body made entirely of living crystal that refracted light into beautiful rainbow patterns. When she spoke, her voice sounded like musical notes. "The fleet composition has been finalized. Each species will contribute their finest vessels and most experienced crews." Dae-ho felt his stomach drop as he saw the fleet roster appear on the displays. Every major species was represented: Zeltharian bioships that could heal themselves, Kethmore crystal vessels that bent light and gravity, Draconian war cruisers armed with plasma cannons, and dozens of others. But one name was notably absent. "What about Earth's contribution?" Admiral Yoon called out, her voice cutting through the alien chatter. The chamber fell silent. Dae-ho could feel the tension building like static electricity before a storm. The High Speaker's crystal arms dimmed slightly, and when he spoke, his tone was carefully diplomatic. "Admiral Yoon, humanity's offer to join the defense fleet has been carefully considered. However, the Council has decided that human vessels will remain in reserve status during the initial engagement." The words hit Dae-ho like a physical blow. Reserve status meant sitting on the sidelines while the galaxy burned. He watched Admiral Yoon's face remain perfectly calm, but he knew her well enough to see the anger building behind her eyes. "May I ask the reasoning behind this decision?" Yoon asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The arachnid delegate's translator buzzed to life. "Your species is too young, too unpredictable. This battle requires coordination and discipline that takes centuries to develop." A Draconian general, his scales gleaming like polished armor, added his voice to the discussion. "Human tactics are chaotic. You fight with emotion rather than logic. Against an enemy like the Void Swarm, such methods could prove catastrophic." Dae-ho watched his admiral take a step forward, and he knew she was about to unleash hell. But before she could speak, the Kethmore delegate raised a crystalline hand. "With all respect to our human allies," she said, her musical voice carrying across the chamber, "your warships are built for aggression, not cooperation. Your crews train for individual glory rather than fleet coordination. This enemy requires precision strikes and careful tactical planning, not the brutal efficiency your species prefers. The chamber erupted in agreement. Alien voices rose in a cacophony of support for keeping the humans out of the fight. Deho felt his hands clench into fists as he listened to species after species explain why humanity wasn't good enough to help save the galaxy. Admiral Yoon waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. Our ships have proven effective in every engagement we've faced, against pirates and raiders. The High Speaker interrupted, his crystal arms flashing brighter. Single ships or small groups using predictable tactics. The Void Swarm is different. They move as one mind controlling. Millions of bioships. They adapt to every strategy within minutes. They cannot be reasoned with, bribed, or intimidated. This requires the kind of sophisticated warfare that your species has not yet mastered. The vote was called immediately. Dai-Ho watched the results appear on the main display. 847 votes to exclude humanity from the defense fleet, with only one vote in opposition. Earth stood alone. As the session ended, alien delegates began filing out of the chamber, their conversations filled with confidence and tactical discussions. They spoke of glory, of the great victory they would surely achieve, of how their names would be remembered throughout galactic history. Dai-Ho made his way down to the main floor, where Admiral Yoon stood watching the exodus. Her face was unreadable, but he could see the slight tremor in her hands that betrayed her emotions. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "should we begin fleet preparations anyway? Our ships could be ready to move within hours." Yoon continued watching the aliens leave, their elaborate robes and biosuits creating a river of color flowing toward the exit. "No, Commander. Let them have their elegant war. Let them show us how sophisticated species fight." She turned to face him, and Dai-Ho saw something in her eyes that made him step back. It wasn't anger or frustration, it was patience, the kind of terrible patience a predator shows while waiting for prey to make a mistake. "But keep our fleets on standby," she added, her voice carrying a weight that made the air feel heavy. "Stay ready for immediate deployment. Full combat loadouts, maximum crew readiness. When they call us, and they will call us, we need to be ready to move." The next morning, Dai-Ho stood on the observation deck of Earth's orbital command station and watched the greatest fleet in galactic history depart for the front lines. Nearly 3,000 ships of every conceivable design moved in perfect formation toward the jump points. Zeltharian biovessels that looked like giant flowers, Kethmore crystal ships that sparkled like diamonds, Draconian war cruisers bristling with weapons, and hundreds of others representing the pinnacle of their respective civilizations. It was beautiful, elegant, and absolutely doomed. Captain Lee Tae-min floated weightlessly in the zero-gravity observation pod of the Incheon's Pride, his eyes fixed on the massive holographic display that dominated the ship's sensor bay. The human observation vessel hung in the darkness of space like a silent ghost, its stealth systems keeping it hidden from both friend and foe. 20 light-years away, the fate of the galaxy was being decided in what everyone expected to be the most glorious battle in galactic history. The Incheon's Pride was one of only 3 human ships allowed anywhere near the combat zone, and, only because the Galactic Council needed someone to observe and record their inevitable victory for the history books. Lee adjusted his headset and watched the long-range sensors paint a picture of the massive fleet engagement at the Kepler Nexus. "Captain, we're picking up the initial contact reports," Lieutenant Park Soo-jin called from her station. Her fingers moved across the communication array like a pianist playing a complex melody, fine-tuning the receivers to cut through the interference of battle. The young officer had volunteered for this assignment, knowing they might witness either the galaxy's salvation or its destruction. The first transmissions crackled through the speakers with crystal clarity. Commander Zethvar of the Zeltharian flagship, Blooming Dawn, sounded confident, almost cheerful. Initial contact established. Deploying bioplasma cannons, the enemy formations appear disorganized. Lee leaned back in his command chair and studied the tactical display. The galactic fleet had arranged itself in the classic Kethmore formation, a perfect geometric pattern that allowed each ship to support its neighbors while maintaining clear, firing lanes. It was beautiful, elegant, and had been used successfully for over 2,000 years. The Void Swarm, on the other hand, looked like complete chaos. Thousands of organic ships writhed through space like a living mass of tentacles and teeth. They had no formation, no apparent strategy, just a mindless hunger that drove them forward in a seething tide of destruction. "Kethmore gravity cannons firing," came another transmission, this one from the crystal ships that sparkled like jewels against the darkness. "Direct hits confirmed. Enemy vessels are taking significant damage." Lieutenant Park turned to Lee with a smile. "Sir, it looks like the Council was right. The fleet is cutting through them like a hot knife through butter." For the first 3 hours, the reports continued in the same victorious tone. Draconian plasma cannons melted through bioships. Arachnid web fighters tangled enemy vessels in energy nets. The massive Titan-class ships of the Mechanical Collective pounded the swarm with projectile weapons that hit like falling meteors. Lee should have felt relieved, but something nagged at him. He'd spent 30 years fighting pirates, raiders, and worse in the Outer Rim territories. He'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming that something was wrong. "Park, can you get me a detailed analysis of the enemy? Losses versus our fleet losses?" The lieutenant's fingers flew across her console. After a few minutes, she looked up with a puzzled expression. "Sir, this is strange. The Galactic Fleet has destroyed over 400 enemy vessels, but the swarm doesn't seem to be getting any smaller. If anything, there are more of them now than when the battle started." Before Lee could respond, the tone of the transmissions began to change. Commander Zethvar's voice came through the speakers again, but this time it carried a note of concern. "Strange development. The enemy appears to be adapting to our bioplasma weapons, effectiveness dropping to 60% of initial impact. An hour later, the Kethmore crystal ships reported similar problems. Gravity weapons showing reduced effectiveness. Enemy bioarmor is somehow compensating for our gravitational distortions." Lee felt his stomach drop as he watched the tactical display. The perfect geometric formation of the Galactic Fleet was beginning to waver as ships moved to compensate for reduced weapon effectiveness. The swarm, meanwhile, seemed to be learning from every hit it took. "They're not just adapting," Lee muttered, more to himself than to his crew. "They're evolving in real time." The 8th hour brought the first real note of panic. A Vex Collective commander's voice cut through the static, his electronic translator crackling with interference. "This is impossible. Our quantum disruptors are having no effect whatsoever. It's like they've developed immunity to our weapons." Lieutenant Park turned to Lee, her face pale. "Captain, I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the swarm fleet. They're doing something." The tactical display suddenly erupted with new contacts. The Void Swarm wasn't just adapting to the Galactic Fleet's weapons, it was reproducing. Every destroyed bioship seemed to split into smaller vessels before dying, and these new ships carried the adaptive improvements of their parent. "By the stars," whispered Ensign Cho Minwoo from the sensor station, "they're not just a hive mind. They're a learning organism. Every time we hurt them, they get stronger." The transmissions from the battle zone became increasingly desperate. Ships that had dominated space for millennia found themselves helpless against an enemy that turned their own weapons against them. The elegant formations that had worked for thousands of years crumbled under the assault of creatures that rewrote the rules of warfare with every passing minute. "Draconian heavy cruiser, Fire of Worlds requesting immediate assistance," came a transmission filled with static and explosions. "We are being boarded by unknown bioforms. They're inside our ship somehow. They came right through the hull." Lee gripped his chair as he listened to the screams and weapon fire coming through the communicator. The swarm wasn't just destroying ships, it was learning how to penetrate their defenses, how to get inside and tear them apart from within. By the 15th hour, the reports became a litany of disaster. The arachnid web fighters found their energy nets turned into feeding tubes for swarm organisms. The Mechanical Collective's massive ships discovered that their artificial intelligence could be infected and corrupted by the hive mind. Even the bioships of the Zeltharians, supposedly immune to biological warfare, found themselves being consumed and converted into swarm vessels. "Fleet command to all vessels," came the voice of Admiral Crestan, the Kethmore Supreme Commander. "Initiate tactical withdrawal. Repeat, all vessels initiate tactical withdrawal." But withdrawal was easier ordered than accomplished. The swarm had surrounded the galactic fleet, learning their tactics and predicting their movements. What had started as an organized retreat quickly became a rout as ships fled in all directions, each captain desperate to save his own vessel and crew. Lieutenant Park's voice was barely a whisper. "Captain, I'm counting less than 800 ships on the long-range sensors. The rest are either destroyed or changed." Lee stared at the tactical display in horror. Where once the greatest fleet in galactic history had stood in perfect formation, now only scattered survivors limped away from the battle zone. Behind them, the void swarm had grown larger, stronger, and more terrifying than ever. "Sir," Park said, her voice shaking, "Admiral Yoon is requesting all sensor data from the engagement. She wants everything we recorded." Lee nodded grimly and began uploading the battle records to a secure transmission drone. "Send everything. Every sensor reading, every communication, every tactical analysis." He paused, watching the last of the fleeing ships disappear into hyperspace. "Hand prep another message for Earth High Command. Tell them to ready the fleet for immediate deployment." Park looked at him with wide eyes. "Sir, you think they'll call us in now?" Lee studied the sensor readings showing the swarm's movement patterns. The creatures were already heading toward the core worlds, following the trail of the retreating galactic fleet. In less than a week, they would reach systems containing billions of innocent lives. "They'll call us," he said quietly, "because now they understand what we've always known." "What's that, sir?" Lee turned to face his young officer, his expression grim. "Sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become something even more terrifying." The Void Swarm had tasted victory against the most sophisticated military force the galaxy had ever assembled, but they hadn't faced humanity yet. And humanity had a very different approach to warfare, one that the aliens had dismissed as crude and barbaric. Soon, the swarm would learn the difference between fighting civilized species and fighting the descendants of a world where everything had tried to kill them for millions of years. The galaxy's elegant war was over. Now it was time for the ugly one. The great crystalline dome of the Galactic Council chamber was cracked now. Battle damage from a swarm scout ship that had made it all the way to the capital world. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the walls where once proud banners of 12 species had hung. Now only 7 species remained, and their delegates looked nothing like the confident leaders who had dismissed humanity just weeks ago. Admiral Yoon Hana sat in the human observation section, her hands folded calmly in her lap as she watched the broken remnants of galactic civilization beg for help. Her uniform was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the torn robes and damaged biosuits of the alien survivors around her. She had been waiting for this moment, and now that it had arrived, she felt no satisfaction, only the cold weight of a responsibility. The Zeltharian High Speaker stood at the center podium, but he was barely recognizable as the same being who had so eloquently dismissed human military capabilities. His 4 crystal arms trembled with exhaustion, and several large cracks ran through his translucent body, where swarm bioacid had eaten away at his living crystal structure. When he spoke, his voice came through the translator as a broken whisper. "Fellow beings," he began, pausing to gather strength, "the Void Swarm has consumed the Kepler Nexus, the Vega colony worlds, and the industrial systems of the Centauri belt. Our combined fleets have been reduced to less than 400 operational vessels." A ripple of despair passed through the chamber. The arachnid delegate, missing 3 of her 8 legs, clicked her mandibles in distress. The draconian general's scales had lost their luster, and burn marks covered half his face. Even the mechanical collective's representative showed signs of damage, his chrome plating scarred by weapons that could corrupt artificial intelligence itself. "Current projections," the High Speaker continued, his voice breaking, "indicate that the swarm will reach the Altair system within 6 standard days. The system contains over 12 billion inhabitants across 4 worlds. We have insufficient forces to mount an effective defense." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant sound of construction crews trying to repair the dome's cracks. Everyone knew what this meant. Altair was one of the core systems, home to the Galactic Council's secondary government centers and billions of innocent lives. If it fell, the psychological impact would shatter what remained of organized resistance. The Kethmore military commander stepped forward, her crystalline form flickering with desperate, rainbow patterns that hurt to look at directly. During the battle at Kepler Nexus, she had lost half her fleet and watched her most trusted officers die screaming as swarm bioforms converted their ships into feeding vessels. Now she turned toward the human delegation with something that looked like hope mixed with terror. "Admiral Yoon," she said, her musical voice cracking with strain, "on behalf of the surviving species of this galaxy, we formally request immediate Terran military assistance." The chamber held its breath. Admiral Yoon stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. At 53, she had fought in more battles than most aliens could imagine, from the pirate wars of the Outer Rim to the brutal colonist rebellion of 2387. Her graying hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her dark eyes held the kind of hardness that came from making impossible decisions in impossible situations. "Under what terms?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly through the damaged chamber. The Zeltharian high speaker's arms brightened slightly with what might have been relief. "Full integration into the existing Galactic Defense Force structure. Human vessels will be assigned to support roles while—" "No!" Yoon interrupted, her voice cutting through the high speaker's words like a knife. "Complete tactical authority over all military operations, or we remain in reserve." The chamber erupted in shocked protests. The draconian general struggled to his feet, his burned face twisting with rage. "Impossible! You cannot expect civilized species to submit to primitive human command." The arachnid delegate's remaining legs clicked rapidly against the floor in agitation. "Your species has barely left its home system. What experience do you have commanding fleets of this magnitude?" "Admiral." Yoon waited for the noise to die down before responding. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of something that made even the bravest aliens step back. "My experience, delegates, comes from fighting enemies that wanted to kill every human being in existence. We learned warfare, not in academies or through elegant tactical simulations, but in the black of space, where making the wrong decision meant watching your friends die." She paused, her eyes moving across each alien representative. "The Void Swarm doesn't care about your formations or your protocols. It only understands one thing: absolute destruction. And that, unfortunately, is something humans are very good at." The Vex Collective's senior strategist, a mechanical being whose chrome body showed signs of swarm corruption around the edges, raised a metallic appendage for silence. His electronic voice buzzed with interference as he spoke. "Analysis complete. Current alien command structure has resulted in 73% fleet losses with 0 strategic victories. Probability of success under existing leadership, 0.02%. Recommendation: accept human terms. The alternative is species extinction." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For long moments, no one spoke. Finally, the Kethmore commander's crystalline form pulsed with defeated acceptance. "We accept your terms, Admiral Yoon. You have complete tactical authority over all remaining military assets." Within hours, space around the Council world filled with ships as the human fleet arrived from Earth. The alien survivors watched from their observation decks as vessels emerged from hyperspace jumps, and what they saw defied every principle of elegant spacecraft design they had ever known. The human ships looked like flying fortresses, built by a species that expected to get hurt. The heavy cruiser Busan Thunder was a massive block of armor plating and weapon systems, its hull scarred from dozens of previous battles. The destroyers, Soul Strike and Gwangju Hammer, bristled with missile pods and kinetic cannons that could punch through a moon. Smaller frigates and corvettes swarmed around the larger vessels like attack dogs, their angular hulls painted in the grey and black colors of the Terran Defense Force. Commander Nam Ji-woo stood on the bridge of the Soul Strike, studying the tactical displays that showed the approaching swarm forces. At 35, he was young for a destroyer commander, but he had earned his position fighting pirates in the asteroid fields, where one mistake meant death. His crew was handpicked from veterans of the Outer Rim conflicts, men and women who had learned to fight without backup, without support, and without mercy. Behind him, Admiral Yoon reviewed fleet compositions with Captain Kang Min-ho, the tactical officer whose strategies had broken the back of the colonist rebellion. The captain was a thin man with prematurely white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had spent the journey from Earth studying every piece of data from the Kepler Nexus disaster. "The aliens are expecting us to fight like them," Admiral Yoon observed, scrolling through the Galactic Fleet's tactical manuals on her display. Organized formations, coordinated strikes, elegant maneuvers designed to minimize casualties. Captain Kang looked up from his analysis of swarm bioship specifications and smiled grimly. "Then they're going to be very disappointed, ma'am." Lieutenant Hong Soo-young, the communications officer, turned from her station. "Admiral, we're receiving requests from the surviving alien commanders. They want to know our battle plan." Yoon studied the tactical display showing the swarm's approach vector toward Altair. In 6 days, billions of innocent beings would die, unless someone stopped the creatures that had already proven immune to conventional warfare. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had thrown their best at the swarm and failed catastrophically. But they had never faced an enemy that learned warfare in the gravity wells of death worlds, where every day was a fight for survival against creatures that wanted to eat them. "Tell them," Admiral Yoon said quietly, "that humans don't make battle plans. We make war. And we're very, very good at it." The alien observers watching from their damaged stations felt a chill run through them, as they saw something in the human fleet's movements that they had never encountered before. These weren't ships positioning for elegant combat. They were predators preparing to hunt. The Void Swarm was about to learn why Earth was the only planet in known space where nothing had ever successfully invaded and survived. The darkness of space around Altair system shattered at exactly 0347 ship time, as reality itself seemed to tear open. The Void Swarm emerged from hyperspace not as individual ships, but as a living nightmare of organic horror that defied every law of physics the galaxy thought it understood. Thousands of bioships writhed through the void like gigantic parasites, their surfaces pulsing with veins of sickly light and mouths that could swallow entire space stations. Commander Nam Ji-woo stood on the bridge of the Busan Thunder, watching the tactical display as the swarm spread across local space like a plague. The bioships ranged in size from fighter-sized creatures with razor-sharp wings to massive leviathans, the size of small moons, their hulls covered in what looked like living armor that constantly shifted and adapted. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Hong Soo-young from her communications station. "There's got to be 10,000 of them." At the edge of the system, the surviving vessels of the Galactic Fleet held their elegant formations, their commanders no doubt running calculations and preparing coordinated strike patterns. The alien ships maintained perfect spacing, their weapons charged and ready to demonstrate the refined warfare that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. The human fleet, by contrast, looked like a pack of hungry wolves preparing to attack a herd of prey. Their ships hung in loose clusters, engines running hot, weapon systems armed with ordnance that most civilized species considered war crimes. Admiral Yoon's flagship, the battlecruiser Incheon Vengeance, led the formation with its hull painted in the shark-tooth pattern that had become the symbol of human aggression. "All vessels, this is Admiral Yoon." Her voice crackled across the fleet communication channels with the kind of calm that comes before a hurricane. "You all know why we're here. Those things have killed billions of innocent people. They've destroyed entire worlds. They think they can adapt to anything we throw at them." Nam Ji-woo gripped the arms of his command chair as he listened to the woman who had become humanity's war leader. Around him, his crew made final preparations, weapons officers checking targeting systems, engineers pushing reactors beyond safe limits, Marines preparing boarding pods that no sane species would ever use. "Remember," Admiral Yoon continued, her voice carrying across dozens of human ships, "we're not here to look pretty. We're not here to follow the rules. We're here to kill every last one of these things, and we're going to do it the human way. The Communication channel fell silent for a moment, and Namjiwoo could almost feel the collective held breath of both human and alien crews. Then Admiral Yoon's voice came back, hard as steel and twice as sharp. "All ships, weapons free. Let's show them what Earth's children can do." What happened next would be studied in military academies for centuries, assuming there were any academies left when the battle was over. The human fleet didn't advance in formation. They charged like a pack of wild animals, each captain choosing his own target and attack vector. The Soul Strike under Captain Kang Minho locked onto the largest bioship in the swarm formation, a monster the size of a city that pulsed with organic weapons. "All hands, this is the captain," Kang announced over the ship's internal communications. "We're going to ram that thing head-on. I know it sounds crazy, but trust me, crazy is what we do best." The alien observers watching from their safe positions at the system's edge felt their blood run cold as they watched the human destroyer accelerate directly toward the swarm Leviathan. This wasn't a tactical maneuver, it was suicide with a purpose. "They've lost their minds," transmitted the Kethmore fleet commander, her crystalline form flickering with disbelief. "No rational species would sacrifice their ships like this." Captain Kang's voice came over the general communication channel as his ship reached ramming speed. "Ramming speed achieved. All hands brace for impact. Tell my wife I love her." The Soul Strike slammed into the bioship at 3/4 light speed, the impact releasing more energy than a small star. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away, as both vessels disintegrated in a ball of plasma and exotic matter. But the destruction didn't stop there. The explosion triggered a chain reaction that tore through 3 more swarm vessels, their bioarmor unable to withstand the raw physics of a kamikaze attack. Commander Nam Ji-woo felt the Busan thunder shake from the distant explosion and smiled grimly. "Tactical officer, deploy the special packages." Lieutenant Kim Jae-sung looked up from his weapons console with a grin that would have terrified a demon. "With pleasure, sir. Releasing the party favors." The Busan thunder ejected dozens of objects that looked like debris from destroyed human ships, twisted metal, broken hull plates, and what appeared to be the scattered remains of a frigate's reactor core. The swarm bioships, programmed by millions of years of evolution to consume any available matter, moved to engulf the debris. The nuclear mines hidden within the fake wreckage detonated simultaneously, each one a miniature sun that carved through the swarm formation like a chainsaw through tissue paper. Hundreds of bioships simply vanished in the overlapping explosions, their adaptive armor useless against weapons that used the fundamental forces of the universe as ammunition. "Direct hit," reported Lieutenant Kim, his voice barely audible over the cheering from the crew. "Estimated 300 enemy vessels destroyed." The alien observers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Hazeltharian commander's voice came over the general frequency, his translator crackling with static. "They're insane. No civilized species fights like this." Admiral Yoon's voice cut through the chaos with the kind of calm that comes from a lifetime of impossible battles. "No, Commander. We're not insane. We're human. There's a difference." As if to prove her point, the Admiral ordered her own flagship into a direct assault on the swarm's center mass. The Incheon Vengeance dove through the enemy formation like a spear thrown by an angry god, its weapons firing in all directions. Nuclear torpedoes, kinetic penetrators, and exotic matter warheads turned space around the ship into a killing field that no living thing should have been able to survive. The battle raged for 18 hours, and every minute brought new horrors. That redefined what warfare could be. Lieutenant Park Soo-jin, flying a fighter that was more bomb than ship, guided her craft directly into the mouth of a bioship the size of a space station. Her final transmission was a rebel yell that echoed across the fleet channels as she detonated her payload inside the creature's body, tearing it apart from within. Captain Lee Taemin, commanding the heavy cruiser Gwangju Hammer, used his ship as a battering ram to smash through swarm formations. When his engines failed and his weapons ran dry, he activated the ship's self-destruct and took 17 bioships with him into the next world. The humans fought with a kind of beautiful madness that turned every engagement into a work of deadly art. They used tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare, Suicide attacks, booby traps, biological weapons, and strategies that depended on being willing to die for victory. Where the aliens had tried to maintain elegant formations and minimize casualties, the humans embraced chaos and made death their ally. Commander Nam Ji-woo watched his tactical display as human ships threw themselves at the swarm with the kind of reckless courage that had once conquered Earth's predators. For every human vessel destroyed, dozens of bioships died in the aftermath. The swarm's adaptive biology, so effective against conventional weapons, had no answer for enemies that used their own destruction as a weapon. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Hong from her communications station, "we're receiving distress calls from swarm bioships. They're trying to retreat." Nam Ji-woo stared at the display in amazement. The Void Swarm, which had never shown fear or hesitation in any previous engagement, was actually trying to flee from the battle. These creatures that had consumed entire star systems were running away from human warships. "Not today," he said quietly. "All ships pursue and destroy. No survivors." The hunt that followed would be remembered as one of the most complete military victories in galactic history. The humans chased down fleeing bioships like wolves pursuing wounded prey, showing no mercy and accepting no surrender. By the time the last swarm vessel was destroyed, space around Altair system was filled with the wreckage of both fleets. But humanity had won. The cost had been terrible. Of the 200 human ships that had entered the battle, fewer than 30 remained operational. But they had accomplished something that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had failed to do. They had stopped the Void Swarm cold. As Commander Nam Ji-woo surveyed the aftermath from his damaged bridge, he understood something that the aliens were only beginning to grasp. The galaxy had spent millennia perfecting the art of civilized warfare, but sometimes civilization wasn't enough. Sometimes you needed barbarians willing to do whatever it took to protect the innocent. And Earth had raised the best barbarians in the galaxy. The last Void Swarm bioship screamed across space toward Altair's burning star, its organic hull trailing atmosphere and biological fluids like the blood of a dying animal. Commander Nam Ji-woo watched from the cracked viewport of the Busan Thunder as the creature's desperate flight ended in a brief flash of light against the star's surface. The monster that had terrorized an entire galaxy for months was finally dead, consumed by the same fires that gave life to countless worlds. Silence fell across the battlefield like a heavy blanket. For the first time in 18 hours, the communication channels were quiet except for the soft hiss of static and the occasional damage report from surviving vessels. Nam Ji-woo looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew, young men and women who had aged years in a single day, their uniforms torn and stained with blood from injuries sustained when the ship had taken direct hits from swarm bioweapons. "Status. Report," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. Lieutenant Kim Jae-sung looked up from his tactical console, his left arm in a makeshift sling. "Sir, we're showing 57 human vessels still operational out of the original 200. Most are running on emergency power and have less than 20% ammunition remaining." The numbers hit Nam Ji-woo like a physical blow. They had lost over 70% of their fleet, including Admiral Yoon Hana, who had sacrificed herself and her flagship to destroy the swarm's command vessel. Captain Kang Min-ho, Captain Lee Tae-min, and dozens of other brave officers were gone, their ships scattered across space as twisted metal and fading energy signatures. Through the damaged viewport, Nam Ji-woo could see the aftermath of the battle, stretching in all directions. The debris field covered millions of cubic kilometers, a graveyard of both human and swarm vessels that would drift through space for centuries. Here and there, small fires still burned where reactor cores had breached, creating tiny stars that would fade when their fuel was exhausted. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Hong Soo-young from her communications station, "we're receiving approach signals from the surviving galactic fleet vessels. They're requesting permission to enter the battle zone." Nam Ji-woo almost laughed at the irony. The alien ships that had maintained safe distance during the fighting were now asking permission to approach the wreckage. Grant them access and start search and rescue operations for any human survivors. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as rescue ships from a dozen species spread across the battlefield. The aliens worked with an efficiency born of desperation, their advanced medical technology saving human lives that would have been lost to conventional treatment. But Nam Jiwoo could see something else in their actions, a kind of reverence, as if they were handling the remains of heroes rather than just conducting routine rescue operations. The first alien commander to board the Busan Thunder was the Zeltharian High Speaker, his crystalline form now repaired but somehow different than before. The ancient being moved slowly across the damaged bridge, his forearms glowing with soft light as he surveyed the battle damage. "Commander Nam," the High Speaker said, his translator voice filled with something that might have been awe. "We have no words adequate to express our gratitude. The debt we owe humanity can never be repaid." Nam Jiwoo turned from the viewport where he had been watching the recovery operations. His uniform was torn and bloodstained, his face marked with burns from an exploding console, but his eyes were clear and steady. "We didn't do this for debt, High Speaker. We did it because it needed doing." The alien leader's crystalline form pulsed with colors that had no translation in human languages. "But the cost, so many of your people died. How do you bear such losses?" Nam Jiwoo looked back at the debris field, where the bodies of thousands of human warriors drifted among the wreckage of their ships. "The same way your people would bear them, if you had to. We remember them, we honor them, and we continue the fight they started." In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began the long process of mourning its dead and rebuilding its shattered defenses. Memorial services were held on hundreds of worlds as species that had never worked together came together to honor the human sacrifice. But the most important ceremony took place in the rebuilt chambers of the Galactic Council, where representatives from every surviving species gathered to witness the signing of Resolution 1247. The Kethmore delegate, her crystalline form still flickering with unstable energy patterns from her traumatic experience at the battle, read the document aloud. Her musical voice carried clearly through the chamber as she outlined the new protocols that would govern galactic defense. In recognition of humanity's unique military capabilities and their demonstrated effectiveness against existential threats, this council hereby establishes the human protocols. In the event of any threat to galactic civilization that cannot be resolved through conventional means, human military forces shall be contacted immediately and granted complete operational authority over all defensive operations. The chamber was silent as the delegates absorbed the implications. For the first time in galactic history, a single species had been granted supreme military authority over all others. It was unprecedented, revolutionary, and absolutely necessary. But the Kethmore delegate wasn't finished. She turned to a new section of the document, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "However, this council also recognizes that human tactical doctrine represents a fundamental departure from accepted, civilized warfare standards. Therefore, the following warning is hereby incorporated into all military protocols." She paused, her crystalline form pulsing with the memory of watching human ships deliberately ram into enemy vessels. "All non-human vessels are advised to maintain minimum safe distance from human operational zones during combat operations. Humanity's tactical doctrine includes acceptable loss ratios that exceed standard galactic parameters by factors of 10 to 1. The document was signed by every surviving species, their representatives understanding that they were acknowledging something that changed the very nature of galactic civilization. They had learned that sometimes survival required abandoning the elegant rules of civilized warfare in favor of something much more primitive and effective. On Earth, Captain Park Soo-jin read the news reports from her hospital bed in Seoul Military Medical Center. The young pilot had been one of the few survivors pulled from the wreckage of her fighter, found floating in space after her ejection seat had saved her from the explosion that had destroyed her ship. Her body was broken but healing thanks to alien medical technology that had been freely shared as part of the gratitude debt. Through the hospital window, she could see the orbital shipyards where new vessels were already under construction. The ships taking shape in the zero-gravity assembly bays looked different from the ones that had fought at Altair, larger, more heavily armed, and designed with the lessons learned from humanity's first galactic war. Commander Nam Ji-woo, now promoted to Admiral and Commander of Earth's expanding fleet, visited her that afternoon. He brought news from the frontier, where human patrol ships were hunting down the last scattered swarm organisms that had escaped the main battle. "They still don't understand," Park said, gesturing toward the news reports that praised human courage and tactical innovation. "The aliens think we won because we were willing to die." Nam Ji-woo sat in the chair beside her bed, his new admiral's uniform crisp and clean, but his eyes still carrying the weight of command decisions that had cost thousands of lives. "What do you think, Captain?" Park smiled grimly and looked back. Out at the shipyards where humanity was preparing for whatever threats might come next. "It's not that we're willing to die, sir. It's that we're willing to die for something bigger than ourselves." She turned back to him, her expression serious. "The aliens fight for their governments, their species, their territories. But humans, we fight for love. Love for our families, our friends, our worlds, and our stars. We fight for the idea that innocent people shouldn't have to suffer because monsters exist in the dark." Nam Ji-woo nodded slowly, understanding the truth in her words. The galaxy was safe now, protected by species that had learned to fight with honor and precision. But when the next existential threat emerged from the void between stars, they would call upon the species that had learned to fight with love. The species that understood that some things were worth dying for, and that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to become the monster that other monsters feared. Humanity had earned its place as the galaxy's guardians, not through superior technology or elegant tactics, but through the simple recognition that love was stronger than fear, and that a heart willing to sacrifice everything could overcome any darkness. The stars were safe, watched over by Earth's children who had learned the most important lesson of all, that the price of peace was eternal vigilance, and sometimes that vigilance required warriors willing to pay the ultimate price. The end.